so I'm Scott Ribe. I work for IBM Watson in Denver. The group I'm with provides natural language processing as a cloud-based service, which means you submit text, HTML, URL, and you get back entities, concepts, relations, sentiment, emotion, and we have some similar recognition functions for image processing. So back in the 2000s at some point, there was an academic paper published about calculating deep neural networks and new techniques for it. And a sort of a serial entrepreneur looked at that and decided that this was going to enable things that had previously been sort of science fiction. And he started a company. And he used C++ for performance. And back then, for a lot of the basic functions, he picked a framework that was new at the time and was being heavily promoted and turned out to be kind of a piece of crap. So we have hundreds of thousands of lines of code. Some are good, some are bad, and it's all tangled up with this thing that, yeah, it's a mess. They also used XML config files to configure loading of modules and routing and so forth, and yeah, they turned it into a programming language that didn't require recompiling. It could be deployed dynamically, and we have hundreds of thousands of lines of that kind of code. It looks kind of like what you see on the left there. And then on the right is one of the first production Elixir programs I wrote, which trolled the directory, parsed the XML, and generated the dependency graph. Be sure to look at the size of the scroll bar. So this was somewhat unmaintainable. In fact, everybody was afraid of touching it. I was hired to figure out how to deal with this, and they didn't tell me when they hired me exactly how afraid people were of touching this. So the plan we came up with a shim. It was basically a lightweight front end that would proxy calls to this thing. That way we could implement some bug fixes right in the shim, patching up broken returns and broken JSONs and stuff. But the main idea was we developed microservices to replace this giant thing. Routing of calls and the assembly of the results can be changed right in Elixir. Well, okay, it wasn't Elixir to begin with. That decision was made later. What you want when you build something like this is you want to be able to parse JSON and look at the values you're interested in, change the values you're interested in, and ignore the rest. Just let it pass through without having to keep synchronization between fancy class definitions between your shim and the rest of the microservices you're calling. C++, Go, Java, everything that's strictly type checked makes this really awkward. You can do it in C++, it's just ugly. Nested variant types from the Boost library, visitor pattern, etc. Ruby, Python, JavaScript, and Elixir all make this really easy to do. And we're somewhat performance sensitive. Not sub-millisecond time response times because we do a lot of calculations on the back end, so we don't do instant responses. But we don't want to add a whole lot of time just for a shim on front. So Ruby and Python don't support adequate concurrency. You can't pay me to write in Node.js. And I looked at Elixir and really liked it. And we did one set of tests that showed a really small increase in latency. It was the magnitude was bigger than we expected. It was in the milliseconds range, several milliseconds, but it was negative. So that was good enough. So what we know about machine learning and natural language processing changes month to month. It's an area of active research. So you literally can't sit down and say what we're going to be doing 3 years from now. So the API kind of evolved into a convoluted thing that had pieces tacked on here and there. And a complete API redesign of what you were looking at before would have been kind of difficult. So currently in Elixir, we decompose this completely redesigned second generation API that's very clean and very nice, transform it into calls. Some of them still go to the monolith, some of them go to new microservices. Then we transform the JSON that comes back, compose it, and return it. And success. I'm at the 5 minutes, but you can see.